Okay, so I am here with Jeff Bilbro, and he is an associate professor of English at Grove City College, and he's associated with the Front Porch Republic. I'm going to put a link in the notes below so that you guys can see the website at the Front Porch Republic. There's a lot of good things going on there. And one of the things that drew my attention recently that they published was a book called The Liberating Arts, Why We Need Liberal Arts Education. It's published by Plough, and it says on here it's $19.95, so that's a pretty good price for this book. It's an edited volume. So first I wanted to, and I should say this book is also co-edited with Jessica Hooten-Wilson and David Henriksen. But I wanted to ask Jeff first, would you maybe tell people a little bit more about yourself as a professor, and also what you do at Front Porch Republic?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Laurie. It's good to talk to you today.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have, as you mentioned, I'm a professor of English, so that's my home discipline, literature and writing, and my specialty, I guess, is in American literature. So I've written a lot on Wendell Berry and on environmental or agrarian literature and theology. And early on in grad school, as I was reading Berry and resonating with so much what he was saying, it struck me that Berry's work really crosses all kinds of silo divisions that exist in the modern university, right? So as an English professor, I suppose, I can talk about his aesthetic form or his poems or something, but I was really interested as well in his theology and his politics and his economics, etc. So I wanted to find people to talk with and think with that would, violate all those disciplinary boundaries along with Berry. And so I started reading this website called the Front Porch Republic that started back, I think, in 2008, and going to some conferences that they hosted, and then writing for them. And then maybe 2016, 2017 or so, I came on as the editor-in-chief there at the website. And since then, we have a print journal that comes out twice a year. We publish books. We still have this yearly conference. But yeah, I mean, I guess I would just summarize FPR's purview with the three words tagline that we have: place, limits, and liberty. So it's really a conversation about how those three things intersect and are mutually dependent. It's also has been described, not inaccurately, as a kind of Wendell Berry readers get together and write and think together, but it's quite broad, the kind of conversations we have. Maybe eclectic, you might say, but I find it really invigorating, and there's a lot of friendships that crop up through the kind of conversations that we have there.
Yeah, it's great. If people haven't seen it, they need to check it out. I probably discovered it shortly after its inception. I didn't realize exactly when it got started, but obviously the Morin Academy and Front Porch Republic have quite a few things that we value in common. And, so it was a obvious fit. We love Wendell Berry. In fact, we're going to be doing a class on Wendell Berry later on this fall. Yeah.
Yeah, we published quite a few essays about Peter Morin or Dorothy Day or other people associated with the Catholic work movement. There's a lot of overlap there for sure.
Yeah. And we appreciate all of that. And recently you allowed us to publish a little bit about what we do there, so that people reading the blog and journal could learn a little more about us. So thank you for that. So like you said, Front Porch Republic values have to do with place, right? With the value of maybe staying put, right? Of localness, right? That is very important to us as well. And, in this book, we're dealing with the liberal arts, with education. I know this was important to Wendell Berry too, very much so. And he tied it together in his own way. I mean, how would you, first of all, before we talk more specifically about the book, how would you kind of tie this book, which is about why we need the liberal arts, into the Front Porch Republic's values?
Yeah, so I first started thinking about, I guess, a philosophy of education in earnest when I got my first job teaching at a small Christian liberal arts school in Michigan. And I had a colleague in the English department there who was also a avid reader of Barry's. And through our conversations, sort of going back and forth about these ideas, we ended up writing a book together about Wendell Berry and higher education. And to sort of boil the whole argument of that book down, I would just say that higher education in particular tends to educate students to kind of view their lives around a career. And if you're pursuing that career and seeking success in that career, then if it takes you from place to place, if it requires you to make sacrifices for your family or your community, well, you do that because that's what success looks like. And so it really orients, there's a kind of formational process that happens often without, I think, great intentionality in higher education in America toward that vision of a good life being tied to a successful career. And so Jack and I in that book tried to push back, drawing on Barry, and say, well, what would it look like if we educated students not to dwell in a career, but to inhabit their communities well and to be fruitful, contributing members of their places? And certainly we need some, Barry talks about we need to have both virtues and virtuosities, right? We need some concrete skills. You can't love your neighbor if you don't know how to, fix your fence or how to take care of them, right? You have to have some real skills, but then you also need virtues. You need a certain kind of character formation that will enable you to put those skills, those capacities that you've developed to work in ways that actually promote the good of your community. So I guess ever since that book, I've been really interested in both trying to imagine what that kind of education looks like, and then trying to participate in it as best I can in my job, but also look out for other institutions that are maybe trying to reimagine post-secondary education in ways that might actually serve that mission more explicitly, more fully than a lot of traditional colleges and universities.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You say post-secondary, and I understand we're both in higher education, but do you have any opinions about education prior to that? Our public education and how that fits into the dilemma we're seeking?
No, I mean, you're certainly right. And I do think oftentimes when students actually arrive at college, that kind of the damage has been done, and there's a kind of remodeling that has to take place, right, and kind of reorienting. So it's certainly best if there's a clear emphasis from the family and from the church and from the community and from the school on education as forming the whole person to be a particular kind of person rather than to maybe get a particular job. So yeah, I think that there are similar challenges all the way through the American educational systems. But again, it looks so different from place to place. I think there's great things about some private schools, but also some private schools really emphasize kind of college prep and can be even more career oriented than a public school. So I'm not sure there's a silver bullet there, but there are, I know, a lot of small schools that I think are really trying to push back against some of these dominant trends in American society as a whole. So one of the treats about working on this book actually has been talking to some administrators at often classical schools around the country, hearing their vision. And I think there are people that are really trying to tackle this in primary and secondary school too.
Mm-hmm. As I'm hearing you talk about this, I mean, I'm realizing more and more that if we did manage to change education more in the direction of, the return to more of a liberal education, we would be sort of in direct confrontation with our economy.
Yes.
I mean, maybe
Yep.
we should talk about that just a little bit before we get into the contents of the book. Like,
Sure.
what, have you thought about like what would the consequences be and how I don't know what you want to call it, the economy might respond to people being educated more thoroughly at this point in
Yeah.
time?
Well, I mean, you get the same pushback, I'm sure, about a lot of Dorothy Day's ideas, right? This is not good for the GDP necessarily.
Exactly.
So, yes, and the way that I frame this, to some pushback sometimes from people, but I'll give you my take on it, is that one of the marks of a person who has been rightly formed and has been educated liberally to be free, to serve the common good and not just the economy, the GDP, is that they are oftentimes, or at least sometimes, able to say no to a job or to something that their employer might ask them to do. Right. So if you cannot say no, I'm not going to take this job, or no, I'm not going to do it in this way, then you're in fact not free. You're just a specialized cog, widget that can do its thing. You've been trained to be a mere slave. So, drawing on Barry and others, I would say that a truly well-formed person would be able to make a kind of twofold judgment in evaluating the quality of the work, whether they should take this job, whether this job that they're being asked to do is good. And again, one of those judgments would be, am I making something that is sort of according to the standards of the discipline good? Does this computer program run? Does this building or bridge or whatever stand up? There's all kinds of internal standards that a discipline or a career might impose that are valid. But then they also have to be able to think about the standard of the community, right? Is this computer program going to be beneficial to its users? Not just is it going to make my company money, but is it going to actually benefit its users? Will this street that I'm designing, engineering for the city, will it actually improve the community, or is it just a way we can get federal funds or keep our jobs, or whatever? So if the work you're doing is not good according to both those standards, then I think a free person has to be able to say, no, I'm not going to do it. And there will be very likely economic repercussions for those refusals. So that's not necessarily a great pitch to give to prospective students and their parents when they're saying, can I come to your college and get a good job? And I say, well, one of the marks, I think, of a well-formed person might be that there are some jobs you will be unsuited for. And yet, and we'll probably talk about this more regarding the book, and yet I do think a lot of students and parents, while they might be initially put off by that, are ultimately relieved, or I guess encouraged maybe by that vision of themselves. My life is not defined by my economic value. I'm a created image of God. I have this eternal value, this high calling, and I don't have to be defined by my success or failure in the economic marketplace.
Yes, it's a confirmation of their humanity.
Yeah.
I mean, what you're really talking about is whether people are free or not. I mean, it struck me that you actually used the term slavery. It reminded me of, I think it's Belloc doesn't in the Servile State.
Yes, exactly.
Makes a similar point, and it's a really good one.
Yeah.
If you don't have the right to say no, if you can't choose what you do, and especially if you don't have that moral judgment, right, to be able to say no, this is wrong, I won't contribute to this because it doesn't help society, it doesn't help the common good. And so I guess I agree with all that. Maybe before we get into the book too, we need to just maybe define what liberal arts means to you just a little bit more. Obviously, it means a moral education. It means thinking about the common good. What does it mean for, say, the student or the citizen who's not in college, who wants to be exposed to the liberal arts? What does that look like?
Yeah, so this is a fraught conversation. Maybe we could spend hours on this, and it's a contested question, right?
Yeah.
So I'll give you a kind of I'll give you two answers. The first one is I think it's helpful to begin by saying what's the result of a liberally educated person? What does a well-formed person look like? And to think about freedom both in negative terms and positive terms. So we tend to emphasize negative freedom, and we imagine ourselves as free if there are no external constraints placed upon me. But a liberal education really is designed to cultivate and grow, I suppose, your positive freedom. So Bill Kavanaugh, who's probably sympathetic with a lot of the things that you're doing at the Moore Academy, Bill Kavanaugh likes to say that likes to talk about liberal arts in this way by referencing a piano player. So if there's a piano in the room, it's not unlocked, I am not being prevented from going down, opening up the fallboard and playing a piano, right? There's no external constraints there. But if I have not disciplined myself through years of practice and become the kind of person who can do that, then I'm not really free to make beautiful music. So similarly, a liberal education gives people the freedom to make a beautiful life. And it's not just that you can do whatever you want, but you actually have to have the disciplines, the virtues, the skills, the character to live a beautiful life. So that's the kind of, this is the product of liberal education. It makes someone who's free to live well. But then the question of like, well, what kind of process should you undergo in order to achieve that end? It's a very fraught one, right? There's a lot of different liberal arts traditions. And I mean, this book has, I don't know, 25, 30 contributors. So we don't all agree on the one method. Some people in the classical education tradition really focus on the trivium and the quadrivium and this sort of process of going through these steps. I think that's got value. Some people think about liberal arts tradition more in terms of a kind of great books approach. We read these texts together. It's a Socratic dialogue. We study the best of what have been thought and said. And that's how you kind of cultivate these skills. Others emphasize there's some kind of humanistic component, right? So I think those differences, I don't want to minimize, I guess, those differences, but I would just say in the book, we tried to be fairly ecumenical and draw from the best of those different traditions. Yeah, liberal arts education has looked at different places, and there's something we can learn from these different strands in the tradition, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course, I teach at a public institution, and I direct a program called the Primary Text Program, Primary Text Certificate, in which we do have a variety of types of literature. So we do, have classes that definitely emphasize what's considered the classics of literature and so on. We also have classes that deal with contemporary scholarship, history classes that use documents, and kind of like the guiding theme of it is we're going to confront you with literature that you can't easily figure out, and that somebody's not going to tell you exactly what to think about it. So you have to have a conversation about it. And in the conversation, you're developing your own ideas, you're stimulating your own thoughts, as well as learning about this text. And I think, no matter what the approach, if the outcome is a more thoughtful person, you've kind of achieved your goal, right? Yeah.
I think what you're describing is exactly in line with the tradition that the book is seeking to, I guess, kind of articulate and defend.
Mm-hmm. And it's a slow process, and I think that frustrates people. It's oblique, it's not follow these directions A, B, C, D. Now you're educated, but literally explaining to people how, say, reading poetry could help you become a better person, or being exposed to a work of philosophy about aesthetics, somehow makes you a better person. It's a hard thing to explain to people.
And that's why it's exactly right, Laurie. And that's why, and it's also, just a further point, it's hard to test, right? There's not like a standardized test that you can give someone and say, oh yeah, you're educated. That's why in the book, we tried to have each chapter be here's a descriptive argument, but then here's two pictures. Here's what this can look like. Because I think it's easier to show people, when someone actually experiences a wide-ranging, rigorous conversation about a poem, say, or about some kind of philosophical concept and difficult text, that can they can experience the liberating effects of that kind of thought, even if maybe they wouldn't respond or wouldn't agree with a discursive defense of that. If that makes sense. So sometimes it's very experiential, I think, and that's why, rather than trying to explain it to my students, I try to help them experience it, and then I find that they become excited about this process.
Yeah, that's been my experience as well. So part of what I want to do is just go through the sections in the book. I don't think we are going to want to talk about all of these, but they're all like questions. Each section poses a new question. We've really kind of covered what are the liberating arts, but that's the first one. And then, aren't the liberal arts a waste of time? And aren't the liberal arts elitist? And maybe we could try to deal with both of those just a little bit. I mean, obviously, I may get this more than you because I teach at a public university. Yeah, I get the sense that people are objecting. No, Johnny, don't take that class. It's a waste of time. I don't want to pay tuition for you to take a class on political philosophy like Plato and Aristotle. I want you to learn about agriculture. So what do you say to people who say liberal arts are a waste of time or elitist?
Yeah. And if I can, Laurie, let me just back up real quick and say one thing about the kind of origin and structure of the book too.
Yeah.
Because this is going to play into it. So the way this project started was just about 3 years ago, maybe a little more than 3 years ago, as COVID hit. A bunch of the contributors and others of us started having Zoom calls just about how do we teach online? How are we managing this? And then we started talking, how is this going to impact our institutions financially? Are we going to have to shrink even more? What's going on? So we applied for a grant from an organization to kind of host a bunch of conversations about are the liberal arts still relevant in a time of economic scarcity and social unrest? What's the value of this? And then I lost my job at my institution. Jessica Hooten-Wilson, who's the editor here, she quit her job voluntarily, but only because they drastically increased the workload and cut her pay. Davey, the other editor, he was furloughed, and then the year after that left his institution. So many of us kind of experienced the financial pressures on liberal arts colleges. And we had a series of conversations with authors and administrators and teachers in a variety of contexts over the next year and a half. And then we sat down together and we said, okay, all these conversations, what are the top 8 or 9 questions that we're getting? Why do people not value this kind of formation? What are the pressing questions on their minds? And that's how we constructed the table of contents. And then we went out and asked people that we thought would be suited to write the responses. So yeah, every question has sort of 3 answers by 3 different people. 2 of those answers are, again, these kind of very brief, here's a picture of this, right? So in the waste of time one, one of those is written by a guy who's an inmate, prison inmate, or was, he's out now, but who got his college degree during his incarceration. I have a lot of time, he said. This is exactly what I want to be spending my time doing. But in the elitist one, we have examples of kind of micro institutions, again, that are working with people from disadvantaged socioeconomic backgrounds or people who don't have access to a traditional college degree program. So I think that gives you, maybe not statistics or evidence or something, but it gives you images as a reader of the kind of hunger there is for these things that, as you put it, reciting what parents and students often say, these classes that might seem like a waste of time are not worth the expensive money and energy required to really invest in as a person. And what we tried to do is take a step back and say, if you view yourself as merely a servant of the economy, then sure, it's not a good investment. But if you view yourself as a person, whether that's developed in theological terms or even just developed in sort of political, cultural terms, that kind of narrow economic reduction of the person should be offensive to you. It should be unduly constricting. So why don't you? It's not like you ought. It's not like this kind of formational education is an imposition. It's more like it's an invitation and an opportunity to unfold your potential as a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which you would like to think parents would like to hear if they could get over their anxiety a bit.
That's right.
Who doesn't want their son or daughter to become more of a human being and come into their own
That's right.
personality, right?
And that's not to diminish, the real economic limits and constraints that people face.
Sure.
But it does, I think, crucially kind of just change the priorities and change the conversation.
Yeah. Well, and the reason why they're experiencing constraints has to do with the withdrawal of our government support for education, right? Like I didn't come out of school with any debt all the way through the PhD, because at the time I went through school, educated people were valued. And I think now, you're still supposed to do it somehow, but you're going to be massively in debt. And I understand why people feel the way they do when they look at that and ask financially, is this going to pay off?
Yeah.
And that's a problem with our larger economy.
That's right. And that's part of why I'm encouraged by these kind of smaller institutions or smaller initiatives that aren't necessarily trying to offer a formal accredited four-year degree.
Mm-hmm.
And hence they can do it so much more cheaply. The cost of college has skyrocketed, and there's been so much bloat in terms of the administration and the amenities that students demand now. And so these more stripped down educational initiatives, I think, have real promise in making accessible, once again, the kind of intellectual formation that we need, but maybe have a hard time paying for in its current forms.
Right. And Front Porch Republic and Morin Academy are both
That's right.
in that line of work. So so what about the accusation that it's elitist? This is something that I have also run into more when it first got started, but what about that?
Yeah, I think Brandon McCoy in his essay it's his chapter response to this does a good job of both acknowledging that yes, oftentimes educational institutions in the West have been elitist, right? That's part of the way things have been, but also articulating that that's not that historical reality is not a sort of anthropological or philosophical norm. That there is nothing intrinsically elitist about educating the whole person. And in fact, when we admit, or when we agree with the claim or the question that a liberal arts education is elitist, we actually reinforce it by saying, yeah, just certain caste of society can have this kind of formation, but most people just need to become economic servants. And then that is itself a denigration of the common humanity that everyone shares.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think in the past anyway, and maybe to a certain extent now, it's been wrongly associated with, only white males, are featured, and only white males really benefit from this type of education. Right. And of course, having experienced I benefited tremendously from this education, which I kind of stumbled into. I come from a working class type of background. I mean, it just sort of, I happened to run into it at
Yeah,
college. Liked it. I wanted to be a journalist, but we had professors there that taught very well. And I ended up going all the way and getting a PhD in political science, political philosophy. But like that is, in my experience, it's almost like saying, it's kind of like saying, okay, you guys, it's not suitable for you. It's not suitable for you if you're a woman. It's not suitable for you if you're a member of a minority class. And end of discussion. Obviously, we brought in a great deal of literature that's representative of all these groups of people, and that's wonderful. And so we can do that. There's no reason for anybody to think that it's
that's
exclusive.
right.
So
Yeah,
yeah, it's frustrating. But we just do the best we can to overcome that, and
yeah,
reach out to people. Yeah,
yeah.
right.
That's exactly right.
And also here in Kansas, I have to say, like, this next chapter, aren't the liberal arts liberal, meaning I assume leftist.
Yeah,
Yeah, like that is boy, do a lot of people think that we just teach some sort of ideological propaganda.
right.
And I mean, I don't work anywhere other than where I work, but in our case, this just doesn't happen. And so I don't know, like, what is the deal there? Why do people see it that way? And what
Yeah,
can
I
we?
mean, Joe does a good job, Nick. There's hard evidence, I guess, that the majority of faculty, in particular in certain departments, certain disciplines, are politically liberal, right? I mean, so, and I get that a lot of parents and students are worried, if I go to this college, am I going to be indoctrinated? I'm going to be in this environment. But again, there's nothing intrinsic to this kind of formation that has a political goal in mind. And in fact, the opposite is true, that a liberal education should form you to be free from political ideologies of all types. So just as in the previous, one on elitism, sure, historically, or there are examples you can point to of elitist institutions. There are examples you can point to of institutions that have been ideologically or politically captured. But that doesn't mean we should indict the whole tradition, because the tradition itself doesn't entail that there are sort of sociological reasons for why that's happened that are extrinsic to the tradition, I guess. And what I appreciate about Joe's chapter here and some of the other examples, especially John Mark Reynolds, who teaches at a Orthodox school in Houston, runs that, is that so they're both in particular writing from this kind of theological perspective, that ideally it is true that when you are forming persons for this vision of human flourishing, you're going to be forming them toward a particular end. So it's not like there's a contentless formation, right? You're having arguments, there's debates, there's going to be disagreements, but there has to be, as an institution, some kind of shared vision of what a good human life looks like. Whether that's you just get a good job and that's your life, or maybe it's a certain kind of vision of social justice, or maybe at a Christian institution, it's a certain vision of what it means to be a human person in the image of God. So I think Joe says, we can be explicit about those different ends. Maybe different institutions can offer variations of liberal formation to those ends. But Christian institutions in particular, or public ones, shouldn't run from that kind of approach to human formation just because they disagree with the ways that competing or alternative institutions have oriented that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. You did point out earlier in your commentary that a lot of professors are, I guess, liberal in the American parlance,
Right.
right? Or they vote Democrat, probably
Right.
would be more. I guess my experience has been that that is largely true, maybe especially now, right? But yet, like, I wouldn't characterize them as, and of course, everybody just has their own like experience, right? But I wouldn't characterize them as like highly political whatsoever. I would characterize them as almost overly professionalized, as in they're not, even in political science, where we're supposed to be thinking about politics, for the most part, we're not actually thinking about politics in the sense of, what's going on right now, the common good and things like that, but rather, how to understand political processes, how to understand the, political economy of a particular
Yeah.
country. And the focus is on doing that research in a highly professional, methodologically competent way. And they literally don't spend any time trying to teach students what they ought to think politically, in the sense of, what they ought to do when they go into the voting booth. It
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how it is elsewhere, but that I would call it almost like a hyper professionalization that's
Right.
happening.
Which has its own downfalls too, right? That can be a kind of a way of excluding questions that need to be asked about
Yeah.
the way that these things, these ideas cash out, or their implications. So yeah, I think you're right that at least in large swaths of the academy, the politics is a kind of professionalization, which tends to be a kind of silo and specialization.
Yeah, yeah, right. And it's almost better to be confronted by somebody who has, among other things, I mean, obviously knowledge, but also some political views
Yeah,
that you either agree or disagree with, and that help you kind of shape your
that's
own.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right. Get you to thinking about, what is most important.
that's
Um,
right.
but this is, I think, part of the social sciences attempt to kind of adjust to this overall trend that you're talking about here. Um, Looking down this list of chapters, again, I think we've covered some of it just in our
Yep.
conversation, but there's one here that stands out again that I'd like to hear about. This is like on every parent's and student's mind. Aren't they unmarketable? If you get a liberal arts degree, like for instance, you get a degree in, anthropology or in English literature, aren't you going to be at a disadvantage on the job market? I mean, we know already what you think about, the fact that it's not just about the job market. And I totally agree with you there. Being a human being is more important than what job you have or how much money you make. I think we're in agreement there. And I think we all need to try to remember that. Um, but, is do these authors here deal with that anxiety, in a specific way? Like, are there ways in which a liberal arts degree is marketable?
Yeah. So we had some debates amongst ourselves. Some people really wanted to emphasize the liberal arts is irrelevant, kind of a very idealistic vision. And other people wanted to say, no, there's ways that in the process of being a well-formed person, you also gain characteristics and skills that make you employable. So we went back and forth, and I think Rachel does a really nice job in this chapter of kind of saying both of those things, right? And there's some really good evidence. She's drawn a lot on this book, Evidence the Liberal Arts Needs by, I'm going to blank on his name right now, but that has a lot of analytical data, Richard Detweiler, that has a lot of data about how people who develop close relationships in college with mentors, and who take certain number of classes outside their major, and who get involved in sort of extracurricular things. He has a whole list of things that are kind of proxies for a more liberal arts education, that they oftentimes enter the workforce at a lower salary threshold, but within 5 or 10 years, they are making significantly more than people who just get a narrowly specialized education. That you actually learn all the things about communication and collaboration and integrating different teams or problems in a employer situation. Those are the kinds of skills you develop through rigorous, careful conversation about difficult texts that you develop in these sort of more Socratic settings. And then accompanying her sort of analytical argument, there's an example from an engineering background and from a business background, both of which I think do a nice job of articulating how people with liberal arts formation make better engineers and make better businessmen or businesswomen. So, I think it's tricky to get that balance right, but I think it's our responsibility as educators to train students not just for to be good persons in a kind of moral sense, but also to help them recognize how these virtues and these character qualities, these habits of mind that we're inculcating will translate oftentimes to success, even according to sort of just economic standards.
They totally do. I mean, in our own experience in political science, we have people who go out, and you're right, they may start kind of, a little bit lower than, say, somebody who's got an income wise, and somebody who's got, a computer programming degree or something like that. But then they end up being in charge, right?
Yes, that's
halfway
exactly
through their career. Yeah, now they're actually like the manager or the owner of the company.
Right.
We have a lot of stories like that, where 15 years later, CEO, or in one case, one of our students went out and just started a painting company. It's now like it's in more than one state. He's only been in business, I think, less than 10 years, and he has a political science degree. And one of the differences these people have is that they can talk to other people.
Yeah.
They can look them in the eye. They're not shy about picking up the phone. They can tell you, why you should choose their service.
Right.
They can develop relationships with people. They know they have a feeling for what people want, right? So there's all sorts of ways in which it really does help them. My own son received an anthropology degree with a specialization in linguistics, and then got a year in COVID. Couldn't really do much more than do a part-time job anyway. Taught himself programming, multiple languages, and then got a very good job as a programmer. And he did, by the way, Jeff, select an employer that would do no harm. Okay.
Yeah, see?
He actually took that into account, right?
Good.
Like, do I want to work for, Facebook? No.
Right.
So I mean, I have my own personal example there of how
That's
that
great.
work. He could teach himself too. I mean, that's a part of this type of education.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
You learn the processes you have to go through to master a subject or discipline, and that's going to be invaluable the rest of your life, no matter what you do.
Yeah, that's right. So there are actually reasons it's a little bit less obvious, but I think that we probably need to do a better job of pointing to those examples, right? And showing people, hey, look, and not only that, but it's a little bit more of an adventure. Let's face it, you only have one life to live. And if you're in college, you probably ought to kind of enjoy it a bit and learn new things. And then when you get out, having more than one option as to what to do is kind of nice.
And I get that sometimes scares 18-year-olds, right? They want to say, if I walk out with this certification or this credential, then I can get a job doing this thing. And they like that kind of security. But I think you're right that we need to emphasize we want to prepare you for the adventure of life, to have options, because things are going to change, right? Like our economy, our world is very fluid right now, and you want to be the kind of person that can thrive no matter what changes happen in your industry or your field that you're going into. You don't want to be necessarily locked into one path because maybe some technological development will render that obsolete.
Oh, you know it will. I mean, and that is just an ongoing
Right.
process, and one that we probably ultimately cannot. I I don't think that can go on forever. So we need people also who can think about how we're going to make our social and economic relations in the future and how we're going to deal with some of the aftermath of this, like
Yes.
climate change, right?
Yeah.
So we need people who are thinking more globally and ethically and thinking about the human common good while they're adapting. I mean,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. Adaptation is going to be needed like more than ever before. And so is ethical and moral thinking because we've got
Yep.
huge problems and
Yeah.
automation is among them. You know, what happens when even high technical jobs are automated out of existence?
Right.
What do you do then? You
Yeah.
know, so and I find that a lot of young people, and I think a lot of listeners to this channel are people under 30, and they are very concerned about those things, and they do kind of have a feeling that um, it's kind of bogus to say we can train you for a lifetime successful career with a great income. Give us 4 years, and
Right.
we'll give you the ticket to lifetime success. They know that's not true anymore.
Yeah.
So, I mean, hopefully this resonates with people. If you're going to spend the time and money to get an education, you should get a quality education that will make you a better human being, give your life, more meaning, and hopefully, yes, make you more capable of dealing with what's to come. We need people like that.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right. Both they can adapt personally and survive these changes, but also, as you put it, that they can maybe be um, part of the process of liberating others and improving their communities during these kinds of times of upheaval and change. Right. So it's not just about benefiting yourself, although that's maybe a corollary, but it's also about being the kind of person who's been trained to tend the common good in a broader sense.
right. Give back to others through
Yeah.
spreading this knowledge, among other things. I feel like I'm sure you feel the same way. That's what I'm doing. I
Yeah.
benefited from it tremendously. It's changed my entire life. I feel like I'm seeing. It's almost like going from seeing in black and white to seeing in color. You
Yeah.
know, and once you've seen things in color, you can't go back, and you want other people
Yeah.
to be able to see things that way too. Yeah.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, the last one, I have a couple more questions. One is the big one, which is, how is the sort of like the degradation of the liberal arts right now affecting our democracy? But one more before we get to that is, this last section is on aren't the liberal arts just for smart people, which I would sort of like phrase as don't only people who score 30 on their
Right.
ACT or have an IQ over 135 or whatever it is.
Right.
Aren't they the only ones that can deal with the content in, say, philosophy or history or literature classes?
Right.
uh, what did people say about that?
Yeah, and this is part of where we turn again to these kind of non-traditional institutions. So, but Peter Momsen, the last one there, he's the editor at Plow Quarterly, a great small magazine that conceives of itself in many ways as trying to foster this sort of liberal education amongst its community of readers and contributors. And then I really liked what Nathan said. Nathan's been doing really interesting work in trying to revive and reimagine lyceums for our time. And, the lyceums were such a great American tradition. They spread across the nation in the 19th century. They were wildly popular. People from all classes and backgrounds attended. And there were rigorous lectures and, really heady stuff got discussed in terms of science, politics, travel. People would come from out of town, speak at these lycea, and the whole town would show up and debate. And Nathan is doing some interesting work to restart these in towns throughout the Midwest, especially.
Oh my gosh, I need to look into this more. That sounds
Yeah, you would
fantastic.
love it. He's based out of Iowa, but they've already have several other states in the Midwest. I can't remember. There might be one in Kansas actually.
Okay.
But the idea is like there's a hunger here, even for people who are not quote unquote smart. There's a real hunger to understand our world, to participate in thinking about it, to be a lifelong learner. And if we just restrict these sort of intellectual activities in the life of the mind to people who are really good at manipulating symbols or scoring high on tests or whatever, um, then we are selling the life of the mind short, and not allowing access to it from people who would really enjoy that and would benefit from it. So there's a great tradition of working class people who you don't think of as stereotypically wanting this, of leaping at any opportunities that are there for this kind of ongoing intellectual formation. And I think providing more opportunities for that to happen is really crucial, because so much of our kind of informational ecosystem has hollowed out that space. So if you have access and you've learned the skills, then you can seek out these in-depth conversations. But otherwise, you're just kind of fed a steady diet of, I don't know, Marvel movies and TikTok videos or something, right?
Yeah.
And that distracts people from what would be so much more satisfying.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm definitely going to check that out. I've run across the concept of the lyceums in the United States at some point studying
Yeah.
history, but I didn't realize really what they were. It kind of almost reminds me of like what Peter Morin was wanting to go for with his
Yeah.
roundtable discussions.
Exactly like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the idea that working class people, in his case, that's the way he viewed it, because
Yep.
it was Depression era, was they needed to they needed to understand the origins of the problems that they were experiencing. They needed to understand how to more or less think about the economy, how to think about their work, and what they ought to do about it. And they couldn't do that without exposure to arguments and to ideas.
Yeah.
And there was no notion that you had to be smart, whatever that means. I mean, I think most people have the intelligence it takes to
Yeah.
understand all of this, and it's
And
just
the benefits really go both ways. When I've had opportunities to lead Bible studies at, I mean, I once attended a church that was mostly homeless people, led a Bible study. You learn so much. I have the academic training, but they ask the questions that don't come up in the seminar rooms of a college, right? And so the people in the academy, people with the book smarts, also need to be engaged in conversation, listening to and learning from people from other walks of life. So I think it's a kind of a two-way street.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. In Morin's parlance, the workers and the scholars. Workers need to become
That's
scholars, and
right.
scholars need to become
Yep.
workers. And there needs to be this cross breeding going
Yeah.
on, and mutual respect. I too have had conversations like that, and like there are just a ton of smart people out there who they're paying attention. They have profound thoughts, but because of where they're at, whether they're literally homeless or they're extremely poor, where they're at on our socioeconomic ladder, nobody listens to them.
Right.
Nobody cares. And you would never know that I mean, there's a pool of people there that could help our society, that could
Yeah.
help our democracy. We're not helping people at any level of society to become citizens. They're not getting this type of formation. And so I wanted to hear your thoughts, and maybe you can, I'm sure you guys all in this, people in this book had conversations, how you think about the current moment. Obviously, America is experiencing some political destabilization. We've got some issues. So, how does the crisis in the liberal arts interact with what's going on in our democracy to the extent we have one.
Yeah, well, appreciate, Laurie. I think you're right. I guess it's a tough question, and certainly we talk about it a lot. There are, I suppose, different viewpoints along a spectrum represented in the book. But maybe the way I would frame it is simply that a lot of the destabilization that we see today in our political and social sphere is the kind of downstream fruit of a reduced, impoverished vision of education that has been in place for decades in America. So that if we educate people to find the techniques that and master certain techniques to get the jobs they want, to kind of have a good life economically, and just reduce education to that, then we shouldn't be surprised when people lose the skills and the disciplines necessary to talk to each other respectfully, to listen, to learn from one another. We shouldn't be surprised when people live very selfishly and look out for, how can I maximize my share of the profits here, and regardless of the external costs to my community or to the land. So it's not like, so I think the liberal arts don't offer a kind of quick fix, but it is a vision of education that, to the extent that it kind of percolates on the margins of our economy, hopefully, I think has the potential to address a lot of the root causes behind our political polarization, behind the breakdown of political discourse, really, in American society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. Is there some way or some chance that people who, because the way I see it is that people who are kind of leaning towards or supported Trump in the last election, and maybe do it again this time, are very frustrated with the way things are going for them, people around them. They've got a lot of reasons, but they do tend to, if anything, blame precisely liberal arts educators as a big part of the reason why America's supposedly going down the drain. And is there a way of convincing people in that group that maybe that's not the place to aim their blame, or I mean, because I feel like we can preach to the choir and get agreement all day long
Sure.
about this, but it's this growing number of people who are somewhat justifiably like getting upset and angry about the general state of affairs, but they're kind of aiming at maybe the wrong.
Yeah.
Right. How do we get them to like reconsider this?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it is challenging because there is certainly a lot of distrust of higher ed or of education, of professionals, elites, right? And that distrust, again, as you put it, is in many ways justified, right? Like there are real ways in which educated classes in America have not discharged our responsibilities well. And there's justifiable anger there, even if it sometimes is directed in ways that are less than helpful long term. So I think part of it is you need to rebuild trust, and make the case that the education that we're trying to offer is not politically captured, is not in service to a particular agenda. Part of it is, this is why I have more hope for local institutions like the Morton Academy, where you can, you're less threatening, I guess, right? You're outside maybe of some of the traditional battle lines and have the opportunity to build bridges with people who might not otherwise find themselves in the same room together. So I don't know, I see some of the battles we have over curriculum in public schools, and I don't know if those are fully resolvable when our communities are so split along these partisan lines. It's hard to see a positive way forward there, I guess. But I do hope that maybe this is a time when smaller institutions can work to rebuild trust amongst a group of constituents say, hey, we're not trying to use you to advance an agenda or to steal your kids or to destroy America. We're trying to offer intellectual life and character formation for you, for your children, that will help them to thrive and contribute to the flourishing of their communities. And when people see that actually happening on the ground, then I think trust is built. But it's hard in our media ecosystem, right, where the stories that get all the attention are of corrupt institutions or bad actors at certain institutions. Those are the stories that get all the traction, and the kind of mundane work that the average teacher is doing in the classroom, or that good people are trying to do in their institutions, that's less. It doesn't go viral as much, right? So it's really hard, I think, to do that kind of slow, unnoticed, and yet vital, necessary work.
Yeah, I have had, many a conversation where I've tried to point out that, yes, there are horror stories. They tend to happen on the coasts. They tend to happen at kind of elite,
Right.
colleges. This is not the case in a great deal of the country. Or, at any institution, you might find one or two folks that are kind of, but, for the most part, it's just not true of an awful lot of
Right.
higher education. And I think we should all, if we're in this business, we should all take the time to try to point that out and to get people to rethink. But you're right, they're constantly, hearing that latest, just absolute atrocity that some person did, right, that's completely out of line, and then that gets sort of extrapolated
Right.
across the whole, painting with
That's
a
right.
broad brush, basically. One thing that I try to do is remind people of the earlier classical conservative position on education, right? That prior to the last few decades, even, the sort of Russell Kirk sort of
Yeah.
position, right? That conservatives used to hold, that it was very important for people, if they were going to be democratic citizens, to get a good, solid education, that know history and philosophy and literature and the arts, and know, what it meant to be an American citizen. We don't necessarily even have a good education in our own constitution at this point, right? So I remind people there, if you call yourself a conservative, and most Trump supporters would call themselves conservatives, even though it's not. I really a stickler for terms, so I would argue that generally they're not in all respects. But if you call yourself a conservative, look at some of these, very highly respected conservative figures from the past who thought that this and religion were the two ways in which
Right.
a good citizen was to be formed. Same thing with Christianity to a certain extent. If you call yourself a Christian, go back and look at the original sources, and at maybe what previous generations thought that meant. And because I think that we've kind of gotten off track, and I don't think it's just like conservative. I think that left and right in America are off track, and they're becoming, as you've pointed out, more polarized and more extreme. They've forgotten who they really are. So I try to remind them, like, conservatism is more than this. And that leads back to the liberal arts. And there are still conservatives like that out there, and
Yeah.
to be heard more.
And you earlier brought up that analogy about going from seeing in black and white to seeing in color. I think it's apt here too that sometimes people get so locked into these partisan divides that they just see in black and white, like this is the good, this is the bad. And a liberal arts education is going to complicate things. It's more messy, right? If you really get into the weeds on any one of these issues, or wrestle with a complicated text, it might trouble a kind of neat divide in terms of you will no longer be able to easily see all the world's problems focused on, Trump voters or coastal elites or whoever your favorite whipping boy is. And but I think it's a more truthful and rewarding way of looking at the world to see it in terms of real complexity, and we can invite people into that, even if that's going against the tendency of so much of the media infrastructure that we have right now.
I agree. Yeah. I think it's a uncomfortable place for
Right.
people when you first get used to it. Just as if if you realize as, say, a Christian that you can never be fully perfect, nor are you a person that's just simply depraved, but you live in this in-between state.
That's right.
This is the fact of life. Similarly, when it comes to our politics, there is no way that you're ever, if you believe that one party or one ideological position is entirely right, you have become an ideologue, and that's dangerous. That leads to mass movements that we all know have done bad things in the past. But it's difficult to say to yourself, I don't know everything, and I probably never will, right? I'm never going to be an absolutely perfect person. And a lot of times both positions that you hear about in our very binary information world today, both of them can be right at the same time.
Yeah.
And this is an insight that you can only gain if you've gotten some connection, some sort of contribution from the liberal arts, and you've trained your mind to think more broadly. Then you can say, yeah, like, not only do I see both sides, but you're both right. That's not, and if you can do that, then you can begin to see maybe how some of these views can be reconciled a bit.
That's right. Yeah. And that's work, and it takes discipline, and it's not doesn't have you don't get the same kind of emotional high from that, but that's exactly the kind of thinking that's necessary to tend the common good of our places, of our communities.